Rosie was an 18-year-old girl who lived with her parents and her younger brother in a small, quiet town. Her family was not rich, but they lived a peaceful life. Her father owned a small shop, and her mother worked at home, sewing clothes for people in the neighborhood. Everything was normal until her father's business started to fall. He lost many customers, and soon, he was unable to pay back the money he had borrowed. Days turned into weeks, and their home began to fill with sadness and fear. The family was drowning in debt. Rosie often heard her parents whispering at night, worrying about how they would survive. One evening, a man came to their house. His name was Daniel Gray. He was rich, calm, and had a strange, cold smile on his face. He told Rosie's father that he could pay all their debts and even give them more money, but only if Rosie agreed to marry him. Rosie was shocked. She didn't know Daniel at all. He was a complete stranger. Her heart broke when she saw tears in her mother's eyes. Her father tried to refuse, but Daniel's offer was too tempting for a family in trouble. They had no choice. Rosie spent the whole night crying. She looked out the window, wishing for a miracle, but the world was silent. The next morning, her parents told her that they had accepted Daniel's proposal. Rosie was forced to marry him to save her family from poverty and shame. Her wedding was small, quiet, and sad. As she left her home, Rosie felt a strange chill in her heart. Something inside her whispered that her life was about to change forever, and not in a good way. The morning of Rosie's wedding felt heavy and cold. The sky was gray, and the air was silent, as if the world already knew what was coming. Rosie sat in front of the mirror, wearing a white dress she didn't choose, and tears filled her eyes. Her mother tried to smile, but her face was pale with guilt. "It's for our family, Rosie," she whispered. "Please be brave." Daniel Gray, the man she was marrying, arrived in a black car. He was tall, serious, and spoke very little. When he looked at Rosie, his dark eyes seemed lifeless, like there was no soul behind them. He didn't smile, not even once. The wedding took place in a small church. Only a few people were there. Rosie didn't hear the priest's words clearly. Her mind was numb. Every time Daniel touched her hand, a cold shiver ran through her body. After the ceremony, Daniel took Rosie to his house, a huge old mansion far away from the town. It stood at the edge of a dark forest, surrounded by fog and silence. The walls were covered with old paintings, and the furniture looked centuries old. Rosie felt as if the house was watching her. That night, when she entered her new bedroom, she noticed strange things. The window kept shaking even though there was no wind. The candle flames flickered without reason. She heard light footsteps in the hallway, but when she opened the door, no one was there. Rosie tried to sleep, but she couldn't. The sound of a clock ticking echoed through the empty mansion. She realized Daniel wasn't in bed. His side was cold. Somewhere in the house, she heard a door close softly. Rosie whispered to herself, trembling, "What have I done?" The next few days in the mansion were strange and lonely for Rosie. Daniel left early every morning and returned late at night without saying where he went. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was flat and cold. Rosie tried to talk to the servants, but they avoided her questions. They seemed scared of Daniel and never looked directly into her eyes. One night, Rosie was reading in her room when she heard soft crying somewhere in the hallway. It was the sound of a woman, gentle but full of pain. She opened her door and followed the sound, her heart beating fast. The crying led her to a locked door at the end of the hall. The sound stopped the moment she touched the handle. Rosie whispered, "Is someone there?" but no one replied. The next morning, she asked one of the servants, Mrs. Hall, about the room. The woman's face turned pale. "You must never go near that room, madam," she said quickly. "It's not safe." When Rosie asked why, Mrs. Hall simply walked away without another word. That night, Rosie heard the same crying again. This time, she also heard someone whisper her name from behind the locked door. Rosie. The voice was faint but clear. She froze in fear and ran back to her room. The next day, she told Daniel what happened, but he looked angry. "Never go near that door," he warned. "Do you understand?" His tone was sharp, and his eyes looked darker than before. Rosie nodded silently, but deep inside, curiosity was growing. Who was behind that door? Why did everyone act as if the house was hiding something terrible? As the night fell once more, Rosie sat awake in her bed, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere beyond those walls, a secret waited to be found. Days passed, and Rosie couldn't stop thinking about the locked room. Every corner of the mansion seemed to whisper its secret. The walls creaked, and sometimes she felt cold air on her neck, as if someone invisible was walking behind her. Daniel became more distant and strange. He ate alone, avoided her questions, and sometimes stared at the old portraits on the wall for hours without blinking. One rainy evening, Rosie went down to the basement looking for candles. While searching through old boxes, she found a dusty wooden chest. Inside it were letters, an old diary, and a black-and-white photograph. Her hands shook when she saw the picture. It was Daniel standing with a woman who looked exactly like her. Same face, same eyes, same smile. But someone had scratched out the woman's eyes in the photo. Rosie opened the diary. It belonged to the woman in the picture. Her name was Elena Gray, Daniel's first wife. The last few pages were filled with fear. Elena wrote that Daniel was not the man he appeared to be. She felt trapped in the mansion and believed something dark lived there with them. The final line of the diary read, "He says I can never leave. If you find this, run." Rosie's heart pounded. She ran upstairs to confront Daniel, but he wasn't home. When she asked the servants about Elena, they all denied knowing her. Later, Mrs. Hall secretly came to Rosie's room and whispered, "The first Mrs. Gray died here, and her spirit never left." Rosie couldn't breathe. Her hands turned cold. She looked at the photo again. This time, she noticed something new. Behind Daniel and Elena stood a mirror. In its reflection, a pale, shadowy face stared directly at her. It was the same mirror now hanging in Rosie's room. After discovering the truth about Elena, Rosie could no longer sleep peacefully. Every night, she felt someone watching her. The air in her room turned cold, and the lights flickered on their own. Sometimes she woke up to find her window open, though she had locked it before sleeping. The sound of crying returned, softer, closer, almost beside her bed. One night, Rosie saw something that froze her blood. When she looked into the mirror hanging on her wall, she saw another woman's reflection standing behind her. The woman had pale skin, hollow eyes, and long black hair. It was Elena. The ghost whispered, "He will do to you what he did to me." Rosie screamed and turned around, but there was no one there. Daniel rushed into the room. Instead of comforting her, he looked angry. "Don't ever mention her name again," he shouted. Rosie realized Daniel was hiding something even darker than she imagined. His hands trembled, and his eyes were full of madness. The next days were filled with horror. Doors slammed without wind. The piano played by itself at midnight. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch Rosie wherever she went. The servants avoided her completely, terrified to even speak. She was trapped in that house, a prisoner of fear and mystery. One evening, Daniel stood by her door and said in a low voice, "You can't leave me again, Rosie." His words made her heart stop. Again? What did he mean by that? He spoke as if she was Elena, the same woman he once lost. Rosie finally understood. Daniel believed she was the spirit of his dead wife reborn. From that night, Rosie stopped feeling safe anywhere in the mansion. She knew one thing: if she didn't find a way to escape soon, she would meet the same fate as Elena. Rosie knew she couldn't live in that house any longer. Every wall, every hallway, and every shadow whispered Elena's name. The nights grew darker, and Daniel's behavior became more frightening. He followed her everywhere, locked doors behind her, and spoke to her like she was someone else. "You came back to me," he said one night, smiling in a strange, broken way. Rosie pretended to stay calm, but inside, she was terrified. One evening, a storm hit the mansion. The thunder shook the windows, and the lights went out. Rosie knew this was her only chance to find the truth. She took a small candle and the key she had stolen from Daniel's study. It was the key to the locked room at the end of the hallway. With shaking hands, Rosie unlocked the door. The room smelled of dust and old flowers. In the center stood a glass coffin, and inside it lay a woman's preserved body. Her face was pale, her eyes closed. It was Elena. A loud whisper filled the air, "Set me free." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. Daniel stood there, his face twisted in madness. "You see now? You can never leave me." "Not again," he shouted. Rosie cried and begged him to stop. But before Daniel could reach her, a cold wind filled the room. The ghost of Elena appeared between them, her eyes glowing with sorrow and rage. Daniel screamed as the spirit moved closer. The glass coffin shattered, and everything went dark. The ground shook, and Rosie fell unconscious as a blinding light filled the room. The curse of the mansion was breaking. When Rosie opened her eyes, Daniel was gone. The house was silent, almost peaceful. Elena's ghost stood near the window, smiling softly before fading away. Rosie whispered, "You're free now," and tears rolled down her face. When Rosie woke up, the mansion was filled with smoke and the smell of burning wood. The storm outside had grown stronger, and lightning struck the old roof. Flames spread quickly across the hallways. Rosie ran through the corridors, calling for help, but no one answered. The servants were gone. The whole place was empty, except for the echo of Elena's final words, "You're free now." Rosie managed to escape through a broken window and ran into the dark forest. Rain poured heavily, washing away the ashes that clung to her dress. Behind her, the mansion burned like a giant torch, lighting up the night sky. She fell to her knees, shaking and crying. The nightmare was finally over, or so she thought. Hours later, a group of villagers found her unconscious near the road and took her to the hospital. When Rosie woke up, her parents were there, holding her hands and crying with relief. The police said the mansion had completely collapsed, and Daniel Gray's body was never found. No one knew what truly happened inside. Rosie remained silent. She didn't want anyone to know the horror she had faced. Weeks passed. Rosie tried to live a normal life again, but her nights were haunted by dreams. She often saw Elena's face in her sleep, calm, peaceful, and free. Yet sometimes, she also saw Daniel's dark eyes staring at her from the shadows. One evening, Rosie stood by her bedroom window, looking at the stars. The wind was quiet, and everything felt calm. But then she saw something in the glass reflection, a faint figure standing behind her. It was Daniel, smiling coldly. Her heart stopped. She turned around quickly, but no one was there. The reflection on the glass slowly faded, leaving only Rosie's terrified face staring back. The nightmare, it seemed, was not truly over. Months passed, but Rosie could never forget what happened in that old mansion. Every sound of rain reminded her of that stormy night. Every reflection made her heart race. She tried to convince herself it was all over, that Daniel and his dark secrets were gone forever. But deep inside, she felt the truth: some shadows never leave. Rosie's family moved to a new town. She started helping her father rebuild his business, trying to live a quiet life. People in the neighborhood liked her, but they noticed something strange. Rosie always kept her windows covered with curtains and avoided mirrors. Whenever someone asked her why, she simply smiled and changed the subject. One evening, she walked home alone after closing the shop. The street was empty and a soft wind blew through the trees. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned around, there was no one there. Her heart beat faster. She began to walk quickly, whispering to herself, "It's just my imagination." At home, she poured herself a glass of water and looked into the kitchen window and froze. In the reflection, she saw a man standing in the corner of the room, his face hidden in shadow. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She turned around instantly, but the room was empty. Rosie fell to her knees, trembling. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Please, let me live in peace." The lights flickered and a cold voice echoed faintly in the room, "You can never leave me." Rosie's scream echoed through the night, but no one heard it. The next morning, her house was silent. Only the mirror on the wall stood untouched, and in its reflection, two faint figures stood together, holding hands in the dark.